It has become a cultural phenomenon that every time a major tragedy occurs involving a young adult male and gun violence, such as the mass shootings that have been a major problem in recent years, the media, politicians, and everyone's Aunt Rita wants to pin the blame on something, which for this generation has been and continues to be video games. In response to these years of allegations of the connection between violence and video games, I had made a decision. I was going to play a pacifist run of a game that was not made to be beaten without violence. Fallout 4. Fallout 4 is interesting in its world. It's a post-apocalyptic world where, following a nuclear attack that devastates the world, the main character must survive the nuclear wastelands full of monsters, mutated animals and people, and raiders all out for blood. It makes for the perfect symbolic backdrop for the point that I want to make. Unlike its predecessors, the developers of this game put a few roadblocks in to make sure that you would have to kill at least one person in order to make it to the end goal. Considering that the factions that you can join require violence to begin, and there's at least one major boss that must die in order for you to make it to the end. So it seemed perfect. After doing a little research about what is necessary to make this possible, I rebought the game, booted it up, and jumped right in. After making a character that I swear isn't me, I was approached by this guy selling me the future. I give him my name, address, social security number, and let him know that I have 10 charisma, 10 luck, and 1 intelligence. The reason for this spread is due to specific perks that I need in order to make this a realistic goal. There are perks called Idiot Savant that randomly give me triple experience whenever I do something that gives me experience. There's also Ricochet, which allows me to kill my opponents with their own bullets, as their bullets bounce off my abs of steel and they end up killing themselves. Charisma helps me talk down people who want to resort to violence and fail to manipulate children and to give me money in exchange for finding their lost cats. I also give myself some endurance so that I don't instantly die streaking through the glowing sea without power armor. I tell the nice insurance agent that my name is Sandman for reasons that will be instantly apparent.
Mr. Sandman.
And I close the door in his face. After I play with a child that I'm not entirely convinced is mine, it gets announced on the news that the world is ending and that we need to get to safety or risk evaporating, like my chances of ever being out of depth the more I stay in school. I hurry to the vault, barely making it in before I am given severe radiation burns by the hubris of humanity, and I am immediately thrown into the freezer to preserve my natural flavors. My wife dies in a tragic one-sided murder-suicide and my baby gets stolen, and suddenly I was given my motivation. My first task is to escape from the vault, which is crawling with enough bugs to be a legally rentable apartment in Conway, South Carolina. After trying to kill them with the power of science, I decided luring them into another room to lock them in was the way to go, and I definitely did not die trying this. Eventually I get to the final room alone, but the enemies were still aggroed to me, so I did what I did when I was a kid and my parents argued, staying quiet in a different room. Eventually I get my Pip-Boy and I make my way out into the open air once again. I go by the old house, help my robot butler through his midlife crisis, and wander off into the distance. So, planning out this run, I had a few things in mind. I needed to get my hands on a weapon called the Syringer, which would allow me to make any number of non-lethal ammo to get by. That's non-lethal in quotes. The issue was, I thought it was easy to get. I believed for some reason I could just go buy it in Diamond City, but I discovered it wasn't so simple. You have 3 choices, 2 of which require instant violence. The third required more perception than I had for locksmithing skills, and so I decided instead of restarting the game and going through that intro again and respecking, I was going to explore and use my experience to buy the perks I needed. Considering my Idiot Savant skill, I could easily rack up experience on top of being made to listen to the best sound in the game for 1/3 of my run. Unfortunately, my dear viewer, this is where my experience ends, or at least my attempt to finish the game. I wandered the wasteland for hours, discovering the destroyed lands and seeing the world for what it is. I remember Fallout 4 not being incredibly memorable of a game, but in this replay, as I struggled to get around with no weapons in a wasteland that is clearly out to get me, I got to think back to what I already understood. In preparation for this project, I happily got to speak with Professor of Psychology Dr. Patrick Markey of Villanova University. His research historically had been on the connection, or lack thereof, between violence and video games. Dr. Markey is the co-author of the book Moral Combat, which directly deals with the topic and the relevant information. When I spoke with him, one of the key things he told me is that based on the data we currently have, we don't know the real reason for violence and the people that take part, but we do know based on the numbers it's not video games. So then what is it? I can't exactly say that I'm an expert because I'm not. I can talk about the subject for hours on end and get nowhere based on the lack of focus on solving any number of issues it could be, but I don't think it's just one problem. As much as I think it was never going to happen, I know there was always the possibility that my history could have created another monster. Everything from my family's financial struggles and the stresses that it put between our relationships, my undiagnosed and untreated social and or mental disorders, and my school's unfair treatment of those who needed help, could have been a factor in an inevitable snap combined with my natural movement to anger. The fact that I didn't, in my opinion, was entirely due to the influence of my great-grandmother in my childhood and how she made sure that I left violence for last. To endure and be kind where you can was what I had learned from her. But she can only have so many great-grands, and so not everyone could have her in their lives. The interesting thing is that during the roughest parts of my life, I didn't even have access to video games. I simply did not have the money or the time working on the farm for them. I didn't discover them until the end of high school, where my issues had largely gone away from me outgrowing and developing out of them. And whatever was left, such as my aggression, had actually settled down due to the results of me getting into games. It's weird and counterintuitive if you listen to the narratives portrayed by politicians and activist groups and, Glenn Beck, whoever the heck. Of course, I'm just one guy. Even if I was high risk, which is debatable and impossible to know for sure, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a connection. Even though Markey says that there's a highly likelihood that the one getting hurt or killed is the one playing violent video games compared to the one committing the act, but what does it all mean? Where does the problem lie? Well, as Dr. Markey says, we just don't know. There are numbers everywhere, and the people who have made careers trying to say how we have to do something about violent video games are getting to the point where they themselves grew up surrounded by video games. People being voted into office are young enough to know that this isn't the case, that they lead to violence, and yet the stigma sticks in the culture's mind even if it has less and less impact as time goes on. And the funny thing is, it's just a cultural band-aid. The consistent, yes it is, no it's not, just stops anything from taking place. Obviously, the politicians and news people aren't going to advocate to do anything, or else they likely would have done so back when the Columbine shooting took place. So realistically, what's being done to solve the issue of those who commit these awful acts? Well, nothing. All the while that people are discussing whether or not there is a connection, there are very real problems being ignored, further contributing to the problems. So what can we do? Well, as individuals not trying to push a messy narrative, we just cannot engage with the conversation, and we should be advocating for solving actual issues surrounding the lives of the people and recognize that it's never just one thing. But beyond everything, some of you at home must be wondering, what does this have to do with Fallout 4? Well, as I was exploring the desolate hellscape that is the Commonwealth, and as I ran from gunfire trying my hardest to survive, it made me realize something. In the pursuit of trying to find a way to beat the game non-violently, in a way I was already accomplishing my task. In the act of exploring and gathering experience, it occurred to me that I was already making the active choice not to be violent. I mean, sure, I wasn't exactly going to be completing the game's objectives anytime soon with me just exploring, but from a meta perspective, why should I? If this is an allegory for the choice of nonviolence in a world driving you towards it, why would I care about the objectives being forced onto me instead of just doing things that I wanted to do? In exploring, I found a lot of peace. I mean, yeah, sure, I was being chased to the end of the world by radioactive bugs, raiders, and occasionally the lovely gentleman who tried the sneak attack on me. But I got to enjoy the scenery. A world meticulously put together by developers over years of work and effort, and it allowed me to get a sense of the little things. And that put something in my mind that I just can't let go of. Violence is a choice. Even if everything about the world was designed to be in your way, and everything seems to be against you, you have a choice. It's not easy to just be strong and make the decision. I've been suspended because I gave into provocation before, but eventually I learned exactly what I've relearned now. The reason I gave up the pacifist run wasn't because it was hard or because I found the hypocrisy of what I had to do in order to kill, but technically not kill the people I had to palpable, though they were helpful, but because it was clear that I was already succeeding. I could explore, talk, and have a relaxing time without having to pick up a gun, even when everything drove me to doing so. I'm not sure who this video will appeal to the most. The internet is an impossibly vast audience. The general population needs to know to keep their eyes on real-world issues that could possibly contribute to those who may become violent, be it mental illness, poverty, or whatever else. Those who are at high risk need to know about the choice that they have and that it doesn't need to be as bad as it may seem. But we all need to be aware of the numbers. Dr. Markey has told me that his lab has effectively moved on from the discussions on video games because there's nothing left to explore. And he told me that he couldn't even begin to speculate on actual causes, but the numbers may be out there. We can work to try to bring these issues to light so that tragedies that we see every day can be a little closer to being solved.